Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, Toby Adams, Mayor, Hauraki District Council, joined by Deputy Mayor Paul Milner for yet another webinar, and this time on Traffic and Parking Bylaw for 2022. So I'll just run through a few rules for Zoom, for those that have turned up and as attendees. Please be patient and courteous to one another as we use this technology in a public meeting situation. If you wish to ask a question, use the Q&A function and we'll provide answers for those. Or if you just want to make a comment, just use the chat function. Thanks. Once a question is answered by either myself or Paul, it'll come across and be moved into the answered tab. If you wish to speak or formalise a comment, please just raise your hand and we'll unmute you and allow you to ask a question technically. This webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it at a later date. And then also that goes out to the entire public so everyone can see it. So today's agenda, or the kaupapa for today, is what is a bylaw, how we come up with our proposals, about heavy vehicle parking restrictions, some parking limits within our main towns of Waihi and Pyro, parking wardens, traffic restrictions, corridor access, what is the timeline, how you provide your feedback, and some questions and answers.
So starting off, what is a bylaw? We're reviewing our traffic and parking bylaw. Bylaws are the local rules that are applicable only in our district. The traffic and parking bylaw contains rules for parking vehicles and the management of traffic on our roads. We can only enforce our bylaws on state highways with permission from Waka Kotahi NZTA. Our bylaw is to protect our roads from damage, protect public safety, and address issues that we may be experiencing in the district. It can be enforced by council or the New Zealand Police. We're proposing some new requirements in our draft bylaw, which we'll explore now.
So how we come up with our proposals? Well, we don't like rules for the sake of rules. In fact, legally, we can't make a bylaw where there isn't a problem. So when we come up with our proposals, and before we go out for consultation, they're based on what is currently the law, the customer requests and customer feedback that we get all the time. And when we say customers, we mean ratepayers. Verbal complaints to our elected members, which there are many of, the road condition and the data reports that we see, and then we get feedback from other agencies such as Waka Kotahi or Department of Conservation.
So heavy vehicle parking restrictions. This is a rule we've included in our draft bylaw for the first time for Pyro and Waihi, and Ngāti has already had this rule in place for a number of years. If approved, heavy vehicles will not be allowed to park between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. within the 50k speed limit zone of Pyro or Waihi. But where can they park overnight? In Pyro, we've got Grey Street, Waihi, Consul Street between Victoria and Baber, as well as Moresby Ave between Central School and the Mine Education Centre. There's no proposed changes for the existing restrictions that Ngāti already has, where Koanui Street is the designated parking zone.
So if you do think of another street, Paul, they can feed that back in, can't they?
Absolutely. If you don't think those streets are appropriate or that there should be more streets, then please let us know and we'll assess those for their suitability.
Awesome, thank you. So we get ongoing complaints about trucks parking in urban areas in both Pyro and Waihi. Issues like they're blocking clear line of sight from people trying to exit their properties or at intersections. There's footpath or curb damage and damage to the grass berms, etc. Or there's noise from late night or early morning operation of those heavy vehicles. So it's not like we want to penalise them, we're just trying to get them in an area where it's safe and good for all users. The current restriction in Ngāti has been in place since 2009 and is working remarkably well.
So another proposal is timed parking limits for Pyro and Waihi towns. So we're proposing a 2-hour parking limit in Seddon Street, Waihi, Rosemont between Kenny and Seddon, and the main street of Pyro, which is Normanby and Belmont Road, between Corbett and William Street and Arnie and Princess. So this would mean signs would be installed to show that there's a parking limit, which is the proposal is for a 2-hour limit between 9 and 5 weekdays. If we approve it, we'll also need permission from Waka Kotahi for the Rosemont Road section in Waihi and Pyro, because those are state highways.
So why are we proposing this for Waihi and Pyro parking limits? Well, we've had a lot of feedback. We get a lot of feedback verbally to elected members through our long-term plan consultation and some customer requests that we get constantly through our info at Hauraki website, that they find it difficult to find car parks in our main centres. So we've heard that business owners or operators are parking all day in their parks, which is meant for customers. So that's another lot of feedback that we get. And the time limits are suggested to help create a turnover of parking spaces. We expect that most people would use and see these and just under their own courtesy or their own law, follow those rules. We're not considering paid parking. That's just a time limit sign, and the people that shouldn't stay there for longer than 2 hours.
So parking wardens, there's been a number of questions on parking wardens, so we'll try and cover that off. Parking wardens can address parking issues such as parking over footpaths, parking over yellow lines or in loading zones, parking over the time limit restriction, which we're suggesting 2 hours, heavy vehicles parking overnight in restricted areas, parking in mobility parks without a permit. We don't currently have any parking wardens in the Hauraki district. Our only way to address issues above is to warn and tow vehicles, which does require some resourcing and would be quite an inconvenience for people that own those vehicles.
So parking wardens, we want your feedback. So complaints about issues often result in dissatisfaction, and we're not able to help customers with these issues. This includes people on mobility scooters, wheelchairs or prams that need to go out onto the road if the footpath is blocked by a car. We are considering appointing a parking warden or someone that can enforce those bylaws to issue those warnings and infringements to those that offend. Another option is to have no parking warden and use towing as our enforcement approach. Both of these will require funding to resource it. We want your feedback on the approach. Should we be towing vehicles? Should we be issuing warnings? Should we have infringements for those that keep breaking the rules, or should we have all of it?
So traffic restrictions, these are some of the other things in the bylaw that people may not have picked up on. So some of the restrictions include turning in and out of Pokakori Road from Waitawhata Road near the Owharoa Falls. This turn can't be made safely by heavy vehicles without crossing the centre line. So we're recommending they use Waitawhata Road instead. Restricting vehicles from being able to use the end of Tairi Road at Waitawhata and Maritoto Road in Pyro. We've received requests from the Department of Conservation regarding that we restrict the use of these locations to protect the environment.
And corridor access requests. So corridor access request is when someone gets our permission to access or alter or work on our road corridor. In the past, we've requested that these be applied for on an honesty basis. We're now proposing that corridor access requests will be mandatory for activity that alters the surface of any of our parts of our road corridor, changes the everyday manner in which users would ordinarily use that section of road, and it includes sustained or repetitive heavy vehicle activity outside the normal use of a road corridor. It is important that we know about the activity on our roads so that we can work with the applicant to best manage the impacts, such as noise and damage to our roads, and effectively assign budgets.
So what's the timeline for this? Nothing's been set in stone, so that's why we're speaking now. We'd like to hear from you. Feedback is open until the 20th of June at 4 p.m. There'll be a hearing in the council chambers in Pyro on the 13th of July, and that meeting is open to the public to attend. And then council will consider the final bylaw on the 29th of July, and it will come into effect on the 1st of September.
So plenty of ways to provide feedback. Obviously, one is to head to our Facebook page and website, We Need to Talk, hauraki-dc.govt.nz. Email us at info@hauraki-dc.govt.nz. Go to the libraries, go to our service centres, print out a form, fill out a form, email any one of your councillors, call any one of your councillors, and we'll help you and put that thought down on paper for you. We'll head along to the Facebook page and ask some questions on our official Facebook page, and then we'll be able to answer those and consider those as part of our feedback process. So we've had some questions that have come through that have been common theme questions, Paul. Shall we run through some of those?
Let's have a go. And just a reminder, if there's anyone watching live now, you can use the Q&A function to ask a question that you may have. But hopefully we'll cover most of the questions off right now. So Toby, first question, what is the harm in parking my truck outside my house where I can keep an eye on it?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a common one that we get quite a lot. So the roads are generally narrower in residential areas, and we've noted damage to footpaths, curbs and underground services such as water pipes as a result of heavy traffic vehicles scaling the curbs to avoid taking up road space. The surfacing at our Centennial car park, so Old Boys, which is now Pyro Rugby and Sports, Ratepayers spent $60,000 this year repairing that, and that was due to heavy vehicles parking on it constantly and ripping it up. So that's basically the short answer to that. We need it to go somewhere where those vehicles are on a road that is designed to take those heavy vehicles. Question for you, Paul, is are you going to give them an alternative safe space to park?
Absolutely. So the suggested roads we mentioned on an earlier slide is Grey Street and Pyro, Consols in Waihi and Moresby Ave as well. But if there are other locations, we'd like to hear from you on what you think those should be. Parking time limits, Toby, is it even an issue? Because I can always find a park in town.
Yeah, I don't even need to read the answer for this one, Paul. It is an issue because we constantly hear about it as being an issue. But if you don't feel it's an issue, the more people we hear from, the better off we can make those decisions whether it's appropriate to have time parking in town, and if we do, how we enforce that. But it's the age-old question is I want to be able to park right outside the store that I want to go to, and at times people can't do that. And particularly those that are, have disabilities or of an elderly nature, they like to be able to park as close as they possibly can, and sometimes they can't. So it was something that we've had constant feedback on, hence we're going out to ask the general population and not just rely on those that we've heard from. So this issue would be solved with more mobility parking. Can you add more? Absolutely, council can add more. There is a standard that we follow. In Pyro, for example, the standard would suggest we need 9 mobility parks and we currently have 11. So it sounds like we've got the right number, but you may disagree with us, and we'd be keen to hear where you think extra parks should be, and maybe some of the existing parks are no longer in the right place because some businesses have moved. So we're keen to hear feedback on that. So could we add parking for parents or elderly people, Toby? Yeah, we could. And we see it in supermarkets, parking for particularly young parents with young children and the elderly. And a recent post on Facebook said that they've trialled this in Tauranga. So it is something that we could do, but it would be on an honesty basis. It would be very hard to enforce. We wouldn't want to be walking down there and checking IDs to see if they've over the age limit for elderly, or if they've actually got their young children with them. So it is something we could do. It'll just be a hard one to enforce. We've had a lot of questions on this topic, Paul. So parking ordinance. Bylaws mean nothing. You don't do anything about multiple scrap cars parked on footpaths for years. Absolutely understand this is a frustration, and currently due to the way the bylaw is, there's not a lot of teeth in it. However, if we do have parking wardens and this bylaw comes into force, there's a bit more scope for council to be able to address those issues to the satisfaction of the public. So it's a bit hard if you don't have a staff resource to go out and address these issues. So we'd like the system to be working as best as possible for all of the public, not just a few people. I think the next question we answered in the slides anyway. So the next one for you, Paul, is shouldn't the police be enforcing this? The police are able to enforce our bylaw, but as people would probably understand, the police have got a lot on their plate at the moment. So minor traffic issues probably don't come up as a high priority. If they do enforce it, it tends to be on a case-by-case basis. If there's recidivist offenders who are maybe parking on a footpath constantly, or imagine if you saw a vehicle parked on the footpath on the main street, there'd be a bit of action, but parked on a footpath in a residential area, it's not really high on the list of jobs for police. So the idea is that council would be enforcing this majority of the time. So Toby, do we have compliance staff at council that can patrol when it's busy now? We do have compliance staff, but they are busy doing their current role. So this new function would require additional staff of some sort, whether it's contracted out, whether it's to work in with another council that currently has this sort of option going forward, or to employ someone on a part-time basis here at council to be able to do that job for us. So currently we don't have the staff to do it. Will I have to pay for parking? Simple answer, no. That's not part of this proposal. The part of this proposal that's important to a lot of people is that there would be a time restriction, and if you go over that restriction, then you could receive an infringement fine. But the paying just to park in the main street of our towns, we're not proposing that. Could we just tow the main culprits away? How would that work? Well, we don't actually need a parking warden to tow the vehicles for in breach of our bylaw. To tow vehicles, we need to have an enforcement officer. So we need someone to be that, whether it is that parking warden type person that can actually enforce and tell us that this is a a repeat offender or is constantly doing this and warrants a vehicle being towed. So that's how we'd use that option. But we still would need to employ a resource to manage that process. Yeah, this is a question we get all the time. Isn't this just revenue gathering?
No, hopefully we don't actually have to gather any revenue from this because we won't need to do any infringements. But if we don't have that as an option, a tool in the tool belt, if you like, then people can just ignore the bylaw. So if it is an option that we could give people a ticket if they continue to offend, then that may encourage the correct behaviour. But it's not about gathering money for council. Any money that council receive is just to cover the cost of providing a service anyway. So there's no profit or anything like that involved from a council point of view. So Toby, how much will it cost the ratepayers?
Well, there will be a cost particularly if no one actually offends, because there'll be a cost to either employ someone if we do go down this option and these bylaws are approved, to have an enforcer or a parking type warden type person. There will be a cost to ratepayers. But if there is offenders and we can get some of that revenue back by ways of parking fines or enforcement fines, then that cost would go down. But there would be a cost to ratepayers. We're not in the business of making profit, are we, Paul?
Not here anyway.
No. So locals. This is the locals won't follow the signs if they know they won't get a ticket. It'll just be tourists following the rules, won't it?
We're not so sure about this one. So hopefully the locals won't ever need to receive an infringement because they'll know that it's the right thing to do is to stick to what the signs say. In exactly the same way as you don't just go and park in a mobility park if you're not a card holder. Some people we know will do this and they'll just break the rules and not really care. But the majority of people will follow those rules that are in place and it's the right thing to do. So we'll just have a check if there's any other questions that have come in live. It doesn't appear that we've got any at the moment. So that might be the last one for us, Toby.
Yeah, well, those are some of the common questions we've been asked throughout this early process. But what we do want is to encourage people to submit. It's awesome to submit a question and give us your views on Facebook, but we like to have those in the formal process so that when we're making those decisions, we're hearing from as many members of the community as we possibly can so we can make informed decisions on what the general feeling or the majority feeling of a community is before we adopt any of these bylaws or put any of these processes in place. So as I said, go to our We Need to Talk website or go to our Facebook page for those details. Don't hesitate to make contact with any of the councillors, myself, or email info@Hauraki Council. Get your ideas down on paper. We can hear it, then we can make the best decisions possible. So if you are online, there are a couple online. We have got another webinar coming up about our stop crossing bylaws today at 11 o'clock. So join us for that. And at a later date, you'll be able to watch this on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel to get some of the answers to some of those burning questions you may have. If we don't see you again, enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to hearing your submissions. Thanks.
Thank you.